was telling my roommate earlier, because I was going to the gym, that a galaxy brain life hack for gym rats returning to their roots, aka just people who haven't been to the gym in a while, is to wait until long after all the New Year's resolution people have given up on going to the gym, and then you go and it won't be crowded. So that's exactly what I've been doing this week.
Very nice.
And it was lovely. And I was there for a short time and it felt great, but there were a bunch of teens there today. And now as I get older, I have a lot of sympathy. I have a lot of love in my heart for teens. I understand that it's hard to be a teen, but if you are in the very small communal gym at this apartment complex, please just actually exercise. If you're just fucking around in your Crocs on the treadmill or just sitting on the equipment, so I need to use that. And then I have to be the boring old lady who kicks you out of your comfy spot while you're chilling with your friends.
Yeah.
I also saw the kid who I am 99% sure never picks up his dog poop. And I didn't say anything to him because it would have been pointless. But I saw him and I knew his face. That teen is not my enemy, but he has a low approval rating with me.
Fair.
He was in his pajama pants and Crocs on the treadmill.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, I definitely can feel myself getting old. I had a conversation with a new coworker today. And he graduated in May, which means he's a literal infant.
Oh my God.
And like the majority of my coworkers have been there for 3 years. We all started like during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, this new kid was like, oh, you know, things are cheerful. And we were like, that's cute.
Maintain that for as long as possible.
Get out of here with your youthful optimism. He's also not my coworker technically. He's on another team, but
your colleague. But if you work for the same place, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the logistics of how that is determined.
I don't either. And I say he's a literal infant, but he's a full foot taller than I am, and also has an incredibly deep voice. Seems like a nice dude.
Yeah, infants come in all shapes and sizes.
They do.
I have a delicious drinky drink today. I have a maple whiskey lemonade, which is just lemonade from Trader Joe's shaken with the fancy maple whiskey that you got for my spouse that I also drink all the time.
I mean, it's because we both simultaneously discovered it when we were up on our little bestie getaway.
Mm-hmm. It's
last year.
My fancy cup with a dragon on it.
Yeah, which I am missing and desperately want to go back to the woods.
We can make that happen again for sure. We have our D&D retreat coming up soon at your home.
We do. A retreat, meaning I walk out of my bedroom into my living room.
Well, maybe not a retreat for you, but there are so many things. This is one of the benefits of getting older because there are many. My life, in many ways, is just a Tumblr text post with #life goals. Getting a weekend away with all of our friends to play D&D is lovely, and that's a delightful thing that I'm glad we're able to do.
It is, and you know, I think there'll come points in the future where I think we'll have to, you know, maybe some years we'll go away and some years we'll do it at someone's house, because every now and then I think we're all going to feel the need to like get the fuck out somewhere for a little while. But right now, for money reasons, it is nice to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what else is expensive?
What is?
The cost of Saruman's decisions.
That's a bit of a stretch, but I'll take it.
You know what? I'll work on it. We'll workshop it. Hey, Sam.
Hey, Ryn. How's it going?
It's going. I'm incredibly sleepy, but that's sort of my perpetual state these days.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess anything else we want to any announcements or anything we want to or need to bring up?
I don't think so. I think we,
Introductions?
yeah, we should introduce ourselves. That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I suppose. Hi, I'm Ryn. Um, I'm the so-called Tolkien expert who really just my only claim to fame is I've read the book before, and here I am.
I'm Sam. I'm the apprentice. We're bringing a chill energy. This is going to be a cozy recording. These chapters are, I mean, we'll find things to talk about because we always do, but they're fairly low key. And we have a fairly low key energy today. So get cozy, get yourself a little drinky drink, and let's get right into it. So where did
Yeah.
we leave off last time? Because I believe we left off midway through chapter 8.
So where we left off is talking about Meduseld. I did my little break to talk about the purpose of a mead hall
Hmm. Hmm.
because we missed that now 2 episodes ago. But um, they're talking about wanting to see Meduseld again. Um, trying to find exactly where in the text, um, but Gandalf thinks that Medusa will still be standing when Theoden gets home.
Hmm.
And Theoden suggests that, he'll be happy to see it because he kind of wrote out with the expectation that he probably wouldn't be coming home.
Hmm.
But he's probably not going to be staying long because this is not the end of the war. This is one enemy they've, uh, you know, poked, and now they have to deal with the enemy, capital
Yeah.
E. But this was about where, because they stopped for the night to rest. Um, and, Tolkien, again, as always, with time and distance, he notes how long the ride and how far they've come in an amount of time and where they are at sunrise and sunset all the fucking time.
Hmm.
Um, which I have further commentary on in a little bit. But this is where they get like the mist rolling over them in the night.
Yes. I wrote that there's a huge billowing cloud of something. Or no, I think the billowing cloud is different from the mist that they have to keep really still and just let it pass by them. There's two sort of big cloud things. I think they're
Yeah,
separate. Yeah.
there's the billowing cloud rising up from Isengard,
Hmm.
which we discover why that is in the next chapter. But which, by the way, listeners, we are finishing our coverage of the road to Isengard here because we stopped midway through last time, and then we'll be moving on to Flotsam and Jetsam.
Yes.
Continuing though, um, yeah, and then so there's the big cloud rising up from Isengard, and then in the night there's a dark mist that rolls by them, um, with like voices. It says, voices they heard, whisperings and groanings, and an endless rustling sigh. The earth shook under them. Long it seemed to them that they sat and were afraid, but at last the darkness and the rumor passed and vanished between the mountain's arms. Um, and then it talks about how south near the Hornburg there was a huge noise in the night, but nobody wanted to go see what it was. And in the morning, all the dead orcs that Gandalf was like, just leave them. Something will take care of them. The orcs were gone, as was the mysterious forest.
Hmm. I wonder if there's some connection there.
But a mile below the dike, a huge pit had been delved in the earth, and over it stones were piled in a hill. And and says that they believed that the orcs were buried there. Um,
And they called it the
and
Death Down forever after.
yes, and no one ever set foot there, and no grass would ever grow there. Um,
But then also the next morning, the river comes back to life, which they had mentioned a couple times, the river in the valley being dried up. But then also
yes.
after this victory, the river just starts burbling again, which I think we can also attribute to the influence of the Ents, just restoring some natural order.
Yeah, and actually, and they'll mention that in the next chapter.
The river does
Um,
become quite significant.
it does. Um, I my notes here it says, like in referring to this mist and everything, it was like, in all honesty, I have no idea what this is about. We'll find out together if we ever get more on it, and then we promptly get more on it
Mhm.
shortly. Um, Spoiler alert, it's the Huorns who will define in the next chapter, and we've already previously defined, but we get our full first textual name for them in Flotsam and Jetsam. Um, I think my confusion was, one, this is not a scene that I held in my memory from the last time I read this book, which was a little while ago, a couple of years. And two, Tolkien is so careful to divide light and dark and like creepy and mysterious
Mhm.
and, clearly good and heavenly and angel like and ethereal, right? Except for the Ents and the Huorns.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's um, the idea that like these natural forces are outside of his good evil binary.
I think that's fair. And I think we've established a lot of precedent for that so far.
Yeah. But they all ride into Nan Kuranir, which the book translates as the Wizard's Veil. And strictly speaking, it's Saruman's Veil because Kurunir is one of his names.
Oh, I did not know that.
It's he also has a lot of names. Kurumo, Saruman, Kurunir. Gandalf also has a lot of names, as we've seen. We've seen Gandalf, we've seen Olorin, we've seen Mithrandir.
Hmm.
But they describe them, basically the fall from grace of the valley.
Yeah, it starts with a description of Isengard at its peak and what it
Right.
was like before we see the state that it's in now.
Well, Isengard.
Oh, Isengard, excuse me. Are we not there yet?
Well,
Is this the
it's within Nan Kurunir is Isengard,
okay?
right? Because it's like a little like we have three sort of big parts of this place. We have Nan Kurunir, the valley itself, and then Isengard, which is the fortress within the valley, and then Orthanc, which is the tower within the fortress.
Okay, that makes sense put that way. We get the layers.
And the tree and the hole and the hole and the bog and the bog down in the valley. Oh, ho, row, the rat and the bog, the bog down in the valley. Oh.
Oh no, we've created a monster.
uh, and the wizard in the tower and the tower and the fortress and the fortress and the veil and the veil and veil and the mountains and the middle earth and the middle earth and the in the book down in the valley. Oh.
Beautiful. Well done.
Thank you. We'll workshop it. You were saying about Isengard.
Oh yeah, I was just saying we get a description of it at its peak and what it was like in its glory days, if you can call it that. And there was a lot of cool descriptions, as always, but the big takeaway that I got was just that it's a big bowl and it's basically totally devoid of living things. And it talks about how the roads were paved with stone flags, dark and hard, and beside their borders, instead of trees, there marched long lines of pillars, some of marble, some of copper and iron, joined by heavy chains. And so it's this very not even industrial. I feel like, yeah, you could use the word industrial to describe it, but so heavy-handedly inorganic. It's a really
Mm-hmm.
hostile environment. And then it also talks about how there's a lot of halls and chambers and passages that are carved into the sides of this bowl shape for just a maximum panopticon bullshit stressful vibes. Like this is just a place that would make your, even though we're getting this picture of it when times were good, times still suck. This is not a place that anyone would want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Tolkien does a thing here that he doesn't typically do. Typically, when he gives like multiple translated names back to back, he just kind of gives them back to back, right? You know, usually we get like in Moria, in Khazad-dûm, you know, Keledzarum, the Mirror. God, whatever the fucking names for that mountain that Gandalf fought the Balrog on, where he just names it in 3 languages. In
Hmm.
um, is it Zithra, Zira, something or other? I don't have it written down. Um, and it's Silver Spire, Silver something. Um, but here he explains the translations and actively says that Orthanc means Mount Fang in Elvish, and in Old Rohirric it means the cunning mine, which is also exactly what it means in Old English because Rohirric is just Old English.
Makes sense. And Orthanc is so fucking creepy, but it's not as creepy as the Dark Tower, which apparently it was modeled after. And I have a quote about that. And he's talking about Orthanc and Saruman, and what he made was not only a little copy, a child's model or a slave's flattery of that vast fortress, armory, prison, furnace of great power. And I'm not sure how you say that. Barad-dûr, maybe?
Baradur.
Barad-dûr, that was close. The Dark Tower, which suffered no rival and laughed at flattery, biding its time, secure in its pride and immeasurable strength. That's stressful. That's stressful to think about, that that's out there laughing at this child's play of, oh, you made this tower? That's so cute. That's adorable. I love that for you. What the fuck is happening with the Dark Tower? And I hope that we will, maybe not in these books, but in some supplementary materials. I want to know more about the Dark Tower because it's got its hooks in me. I have to know. I have a morbid fascination with
Interesting.
what this could possibly be.
Um, I don't want to dig too much into Orthanc this time.
Yeah, because we've got a lot to go through.
We do. But technically speaking, Orthanc was not built by Sauron. He just lives there and has
Ooh.
like built onto Isengard and made it his fortress and made it Mordor like, his
Mhm,
own mini Mordor, basically. But Orthanc and the Fortress of Isengard were built by the men of Gondor and the men of Numenor in times of old.
mhm.
So,
What's the point of building a place like this besides just to be, well, I mean, I guess if Saruman made the city around it, I can see the point of building a big tower. But all the rest of it with the pillars and the bowl shape, the only reason that exists is to be an evil fortress. There's no reason that you say, "Oh yeah, our families would love to live here. This would be a great town."
listen, I think, in this case, I think we can say that Tolkien probably went, I should make a wizard's tower. I should make a fortress for the wizard's tower. And then went, I should probably establish a backstory for the fortress around the wizard's tower.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is not, people aren't moving there for the great schools. This
Are
is
you sure? I
barracks.
mean, there's a wizard there. This is
I
a
mean,
center of knowledge.
this is true, but the admission rates to Orthanc are just ridiculous. You have those, celebrity college admission scandals. Everybody's trying to get a foot in the door there, and it just doesn't happen.
It really wants to be an Ivy League, but it's just not.
Mm.
But man, tuition's still really high. Anyway,
But so we get all of this cool description, and then flashing forward to the present moment and how it actually looks now. And there's cracked stones everywhere. Literally everything is destroyed. The big ring, and first it's described as like a bowl and then it's like a ring, so I wasn't entirely sure what I was supposed to be picturing here.
So
Mhm.
it's Nan Kuranir is the bowl.
Okay.
Isengard is the ring.
Okay. Gotcha. I'm gonna keep having trouble with this, so you're gonna have to keep reminding me,
I
but
got
I
you.
appreciate your patience. But it's filled with water and there's beams and broken pillars and chests and shit everywhere. It's just wreckage. But on top of one of the big rubble heaps is our friends. It's Mary and Pippin.
Yeah, I really love though how we approach not knowing. I mean, knowing it's Merry and Pippin because we know who it is, obviously, but almost seeing this through the eyes of the Rohirrim
Mhm.
because we have a description, right, of the king and his company entering the walls of Isengard and seeing there was a great rubble heap, and suddenly they were aware of two small figures lying on it at their ease, gray clad, hardly to be seen among the stones. And they have like plates and bottles all around them. And it says one seemed asleep, and the other, with crossed legs and arms behind his head, leaned back against a broken rock and sent from his mouth long wisps and little rings of blue smoke. And then, as soon as he notices them, he sprang to his feet. A young man he looked, or like one, though not much more than half a man in height. His head of brown curling hair was uncovered, and he was clad in a travel-stained cloak of the same hue and shape as the companions of Gandalf had worn when they rode to Edoras. And then, of course, he fucking dramatically welcomes them.
I love it. So I think it's Mary that yeah, Mary's talking doing most of the talking cuz Pippin is fucking asleep. But he's being very grave and serious and formal, and apparently he had been given orders to welcome Theoden and everyone else with fitting words, quote unquote. So he tried really hard to come up with something fancy to say, and he did a good job.
Yeah. Welcome, my lords, to Isengard. We are the door wardens. Meriadoc, son of Saradoc, is my name, and my companion, who, alas, is overcome with weariness, is Peregrine, son of Paladin of the House of Took. Far in the north is our home. The Lord Saruman is within, but at the moment he is closeted with one worm tongue, or doubtless he would be here to welcome such honorable guests.
Delightful.
It's perfect. And I love the fact that he says Treebeard has taken over the management of Isengard.
Mhm. That's such a gentle way of putting it. He's taken over the management.
Well, I was like, it's like hanging a sign on like a universally despised place that just says like under new management.
Spirit Halloween.
um, Spirit and Moot.
Yes.
um, Gimli is pissed.
Oh my god, he's so fucking upset. Did you want to read the quote? Because I wrote down a significant portion of what Gimli says.
No, I don't have like anything significant. Just uh, so mad.
Yeah, no, he just lays into them. Gimli, who still very actively has a head wound, but he just goes after them. You rascals, you woolly footed and wool pated truants, a fine hunt you have led us. 200 leagues through fen and forest, battle and death to rescue you. And here we find you feasting and idling and smoking. Smoking. Where did you come by the weed, you villains? And it's so good. He's obviously expressing his love, and somebody else in the company, one of the Rohirrim, says, "It's obvious we're witnessing the reunion of old friends." But so Gimli's priorities, right, is you little pieces of shit. We have worked so hard to find you, and where did you get the weed? And I know that it's tobacco because
Oh,
they
we'll
say
talk
that it's
about that.
tobacco,
We'll
but
talk about it.
it's weed. It's weed. They call it pipe weed. He refers to it as weed, and
We'll
I
talk
love those
about it.
priorities. Yes.
Anyway, Legolas is amused, is like laughing about it, and he goes, "Is like got any more wine?"
Hmm.
Pippin's like, "Dude, we got it here. We plundered it all here. This is our wages for hard-earned tales."
Yeah.
Um, but Theoden is our first like distant person who knows about hobbits.
Yeah, and Merry and Pippin have to do a little bit of explaining of what hobbits are, but they are surprised that Theoden has a name for them in his language, which I am not sure because of the arrangement of consonants how to pronounce it, but you're more confident pronouncing things, so you can try.
I mean, I'm just gonna say Holbitlan,
That seems reasonable.
but he gives like a short description of, the singular story that, he knows essentially, like the singular description that he's aware of. They live far away over many hills and rivers. Um, and he goes, but I didn't know you could breathe fire. And Mary goes, oh, my good bitch, let me educate you.
So do the Rohirrim just not smoke?
No. And I have commentary on this
When
later.
we get to the when we get to the barrels later.
Yeah, we'll talk about
Okay.
pipeweed.
Great.
Um, but Mary, of course, starts giving an education on pipeweed and how smoking began
Mhm.
in the year 1070, according to our reckoning. How old Toby came by the plant, dot, dot, dot. And then Gandalf is like, all right, hang on.
There's a time and a place. Don't talk to hobbits too much because they will sit with you on the edge of ruin and tell you about shit that their great great grandfathers did. We do not have time for this right now. Let's go meet some Ents. You're in for a treat. Let's go meet Treebeard. Come on, Theoden. Let's go.
And Mary, gives Gandalf a message. He seems mostly unsurprised. He seems mighty unsurprised to see Gandalf. Um, and next chapter we'll learn why that is.
Hmm. And I
Because
love. Okay, go.
if in the text, this is our first time seeing with Merry and Pippin seeing Gandalf after Gandalf's death and resurrection.
Hmm.
Um, but obviously, timeline, that's not the case.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. It took me a second to piece all of that together in my mind, but yes, they have seen him already.
yeah. But Theoden goes with Gandalf, but not before telling the hobbits that they'll have to sit and talk about the deeds of their grandsires and herb lore as much as the hobbits like another time.
Which is so sweet. I love that. I love people being interested in the hobbits. I felt that way with Sam and Lorien when the elves were just genuinely interested in getting to know him. And I like Theoden being interested in Merry and Pippin. It's nice.
I love Pippin's little sign off. He goes,
Hmm.
"So that is the King of Rohan, a fine old fellow, very polite."
And I liked it says that Pippin said this in an undertone. So I like to imagine they're saying this while they're bowing and watching them walk away. Like, oh, he's a fine old fellow, very polite. Like even in this very formal setting, they're still themselves. And Pippin is still a silly guy. But I am just so happy to have our two of our hobbits back because they did such a good job. And I texted you when I was reading this part that I was getting emotional about hobbits because we've talked about big people underestimating hobbits and that being a problem
Mhm.
because they fucking took Isengard. They roused the Ents and raised an army, and then they're just sitting and chilling and smoking their pipeweed when the rest of the party shows up. Like, hey, what's up, losers? Isengard is under our control now. And I talked about this last time too. They've gone from being totally unqualified to even be there to making this massive contribution while still being themselves and still being true to themselves. And I just love that.
Do we want to move on to Flotsam and Jetsam?
I think we should. Let's go.
The hunters have found their quarries,
Hmm.
and their quarries treat them to a meal. Uh, I wasn't thrilled with Gimli here.
Tell
Like,
me more
he's like
about that.
actively angry at them and keeps saying
Yeah.
like he has a score against them. It's like almost as if he sort of like blames them for getting kidnapped and then freeing themselves and then going with the Ents instead of finding the company.
Hmm.
Um, but we saw like when we were in Merry and Pippin's heads that like they were sort of convinced that the company had gone with Frodo. They were like they all did their job. Now it's our job to deal with ourselves, and like we're not going to hold it against them.
Yeah.
Um, I can be a little forgiving because Gimli's got a head injury right now, and he's always a little bit gruff and just fought a battle.
Mhm.
Um,
But this is our second instance of Gimli liking to keep score because as they tell him more details about the story and give him more food and drink, he keeps basically saying, "Okay, that's earned you a couple points. That's earned you a couple points," until he's happy with everything they've done for him. But yeah, he's mega grouchy in this interaction, more so than is warranted.
it's a little bit different from the score he's keeping with Legolas.
Yeah.
I think that one's more fun, and also maybe if he could get to that one soon, he might be less grouchy.
This is true. Yeah, that's a more intimate situation. But they
Um,
all get settled and Pippin offers to usher everyone inside an old guardhouse, but Gimli, again, doesn't want to go into any orc dwelling or eat any orc food. And I forget if it must have been Merry and Pippin who mentioned this in a previous chapter about being dubious about orc food and especially orc meat because they don't know where it came from. That could be people. We're not going to touch it. So I think aversion to orc food is justified. That's reasonable. But they
mhm.
assure Gimli that there were men in Isengard too, and they have normal food that they can eat. And Gimli is sad that they don't have any weed. But then Mary says, we don't have any right now, but that's another story. It'll wait until after lunch. And they then, in classic Hobbit fashion, produce what sounds like an amazing meal, but then still apologize for it being inadequate. They list all of this stuff, but then we only have honey and butter for the bread. The scandal. Only two condiments for the bread. This is just, they're really roughing it out here.
Yeah, okay. It's salt pork, bacon, a couple of days old bread, so toast, and essentially a compound honey butter that they can make themselves.
Hmm.
Um, I personally could use something green or fruity. Although they did mention that deliveries had been interrupted lately. Yes, the deliveries have been rather interrupted in the last few days.
Hmm.
Um, and I also think some cheese would not go amiss, but you know what? At this point, if I were in this situation, I also would not be complaining.
Yeah, that is a hearty meal. They've got two different kinds of proteins. They've got a carb, they've got fat, they've got sugar. They'll be fine.
Yeah. Um, but they eat their lunch. The hobbits have a second lunch. They discuss the fact that Merry and Pippin have drunk of the Ent draft, which made them grow taller and made their hair thick and curly.
Yeah. And
Um, and they look in the
yeah.
bloom of health. And quite frankly, I wouldn't mind a little of the Ent draft.
Yeah, that sounds great.
It sounds like I I'm a good height, but I can be an inch taller. That's fine.
Mhm.
I would love to have incredible hair and look in the bloom of health.
That would be lovely. And I also want to know if when hopefully I'm manifesting when, not if, when their main characters still live, maybe. When they return to the Shire, if Merry and Pippin will be freakishly tall compared to other hobbits. I want to know how much they grew because it was noticeable to I
Uh-huh.
think Gimli, who to his credit is making some charitable observations. So if it's enough that he notices when they go back to the Shire, I mean, that's probably not going to be the first thing that people comment on, but eventually they'll notice. And that would be really funny.
Um, but they sort of keep starting to get ready to do the tale, and every time they start getting ready to jump into their the story of what's gone on with them the last few days, they keep going let's go inside first, let's have lunch first, let's smoke first,
Hmm.
let's have a drink first. But anyway, they decide to have a small leather bag full of tobacco, right? So they do expressly say it's tobacco.
Hmm.
But frequently throughout this book and throughout The Hobbit, they refer to it as pipeweed.
Yeah.
And Tolkien in the introduction states that it was probably a variety of nicotiana, aka tobacco. You know, with that piece of evidence, we can assume that in this translation, quote unquote, that he's chosen to make, that he's chosen to translate whatever the word for pipe weed is to tobacco, regardless of whether it's tobacco or cannabis or something else entirely, right?
Hmm, that's a good point.
There's sort of a running theory slash headcanon in the fandom that hobbits are like that TM about food because pipeweed is in fact weed and they have the munchies all the goddamn time.
That would make sense. I mean, I will out myself as a very boring person who has I've never done a weed. I don't know anything. I only have anecdotal stories from friends. I don't fucking know anything. So, any commentary that I have about how accurately or not this represents cannabis is not going to be valuable.
I want to know what havoc would be unleashed on the world if someone introduced the hobbits to edibles.
I'm astonished that they haven't come up with that idea already. That
Uh-huh.
seems like a perfectly natural combination of things.
You'd think so. Um, they make like a big deal out of having to possibly share pipes.
Mhm.
And I'm like, Pippin, my guy, have you never passed a joint around?
That was the vibe. I again, as I'm aware that passing joints around is a thing, and so I thought, okay, this is reminiscent of something that I anecdotally know to happen to other people. But yeah, that was the
I'm
vibe.
like, or a bong. Like, who shows up with their own goddamn bong?
BYOB, bring your own bong.
Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't smoke anymore. So, like, it's been a couple of years. Um, and even before I stopped smoking, or like before I stopped partaking, I'd switched to edibles anyway.
I was talking to one of my brothers who is a listener of the show. Hi, about his weed experiences, and he was saying something about smoking, and I was just like, "Oh my god, why are you smoking? It's going to destroy your lungs. Do edibles like a goddamn adult." And he was like, "I know. I'm sorry."
No,
You
it's
know who you
been
are. He's making more responsible choices now, but
that's good. No, I much prefer edibles as a mechanism personally. Although it has to be a decent edible, I've had some truly awful edibles.
I've heard some stories.
Not like in the fact that it I was high for 26 hours straight. Not that story. But just the fact that the edible itself was basically inedible.
Mm,
Um, as opposed to like the gummies that one can get in states where that's legal,
yeah.
like ours. Pippin refers to like his spare pipes as being precious as rings to him,
Mhm.
which is fair. That's stoner logic.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk real quick before we move on about the history of smoking, quote unquote historical anachronisms, and also about the brain.
Okay, I would love to hear it.
Um, so tobacco is native to the Americas. Just as a let's put that out there.
Mhm.
And as we've previously mentioned, Tolkien wanted to make a mythology for England, right? Uh, Middle Earth is loosely corresponding to Europe. It's like meant to sort of exist in our world,
Mhm.
kind of, sort of ish, right? He intended for these books to be like our world a very, very long time ago. But Gaffer Gamgee is also a local expert in potatoes.
Mhm.
And the inclusion of the potato is the only thing that's making me not write off Tolkien saying pipeweed is tobacco. Because if there's one thing from the Americas, another thing from the Americas only makes sense.
That makes sense. So are potatoes a thing originally from the Americas?
Potatoes originated in South America, yes.
I did not know that. Thank you, South America, for your incredibly valuable contribution to the world. I mean, many valuable contributions, but potatoes are up there.
Listen, potatoes and peppers have basically completely revolutionized world cuisine in
Hmm.
general, and both of those things are from the Americas.
Hell yeah.
Um, but anyway, the earliest evidence that we have for the smoking of tobacco is about 7,000 years ago in the Andes Mountains.
Hmm.
And it's possible that it existed as like incense burning earlier, but pipe smoking originated around then and spread throughout the Americas. And it appears to have been both, at various times in various locations, a ceremonial and a recreational activity.
Hmm.
Um, Cannabis, on the other hand, is native to Asia, and parts of the hemp plant and other psychoactive plants, including opium poppies, have been burned as incense and potentially inhaled in ceremonial and social settings from as early as 5,000 years ago, roughly, right? There are a few, by which I mean six, uh, examples of pipes from Zambia and Ethiopia uh, that may contain traces of THC, which, for those of you who did not take middle school health class, is the psychoactive ingredient in weed.
Hmm.
Um, but other than those six examples, pipe smoking doesn't appear to have spread in Eurasia and Africa until after European contact with the Americas.
Hmm.
Um, One of the earliest records that we have of Europeans smoking in the way that we'd recognize today is from 1556 with an English sailor in Bristol.
That feels relatively recent in the grand scheme of things.
You'd think so, but also, what sort of sauce goes on pizza?
Tomato sauce?
Where do tomatoes come from, Sam?
The Americas, probably, based on context clues.
Yes. You know, so what did the Italians do for sauces, for their pastas and pizzas and anything else prior to European contact with the Americas?
I don't fucking know.
Carrots, carrot sauces,
Oh, interesting.
interestingly. Yeah. Um, I've made a couple of carrot sauces, although the carrot sauce that I made involved tomato paste, so
Mm,
it
not quite historical.
no, we got close. Um, but yeah, the basically after Europeans brought smoking, like pipe smoking, over to Eurasia, it spread like fucking wildfire,
Hmm.
um, burned its way across the continent, one might say.
One might.
Um, and, by the 19th century, it was fucking everywhere. Um, but anyway, let's talk about the brain a little bit. We won't get too deep because it's been forever since I took physiology. But there are two types of receptors in our brain. Well,
Mhm.
there's a lot of types in our of receptors in our brain, but the two types we're going to focus on in this little talk are cannabinoid receptors and nicotinic acetylcholine receptors,
All right, hit me.
which I think you might be able to guess what they're named after.
Hmm.
Cannabinoid receptors bind to cannabinoids, and they can bind to phytocannabinoids, which are plant-based cannabinoids like THC. But they're designed to function with endocannabinoids, which are fatty acid neurotransmitters that our body produces, um, that are part of the endocannabinoid system, which is a portmanteau of endogenous cannabinoids, so endogenous being native to the body.
Hmm.
Um, and these are involved in regulating metabolism, appetite, memory, pain sensation, mood, fertility, pregnancy and natal development, movement, motor function. Um, Anandamide is an endocannabinoid that might be responsible for the runner's high.
Is that why you texted me about that when I told you I was going to the gym earlier?
That is because I was currently reading about it.
Hmm.
Um, So, you know, that could have an effect on hobbits' appetites,
Hmm.
perhaps, and also their moods, why they're so cheerful. And then nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are cholinergic receptors that primarily act with acetylcholine, which is the primary neurotransmitter. I want to say it's the parasympathetic nervous system. It's and in the peripheral nervous system, it functions with nicotinic receptors function with motor neurons responsible for muscle contraction.
Hmm.
But acetylcholine is also involved in learning, memory, mood, sleep, motor control. Um, and so um, nicotine also activates those receptors in the same way that THC activates the cannabinoid receptors, which is why you get effects involving all of those things when you smoke tobacco or when you smoke weed.
That makes sense.
Anyways, the point of all of this is uh, Tolkien was not a physiologist. He just probably, I would assume, was a smoker like 95 goddamn percent of people at his time and decided to include hobbits as smokers. And whatever they're smoking, it's going to have some sort of effect on them. I want to know more about hobbit physiology. We've discussed I want to know about hobbit growth patterns,
Hmm.
but Tolkien is pulling a lot of historical inaccuracies into his very European book here, Professor.
Makes sense considering his
Um,
perspective. And
but I'm
there
okay with that.
and there is something a little bit sinister about the fact that this pipeweed is here in Isengard because
Yeah.
Mary is talking about how they found just giant fucking barrels of it and it's long bottom leaf and he's talking about the brand marks on the barrels and what year they were from. But it says, how it came here, I can't imagine. For Saruman's private use, I fancy. I never knew that it went so far abroad, but it comes in handy now. So he's finding a silver lining. But there hasn't been open trade between the Shire and Isengard. So there, Saruman has a source. He has a guy, he's a weed guy. But that means that there is somebody in the Shire or with access to the Shire who is bringing this stuff here. And maybe it will never be further explained, but there is just that little bit of sinister seed that there's his influence. He's got his little
Yeah.
tendrils of power everywhere.
Well, and it's kind of interesting because, um, I went back to the prologue. There's a section of the prologue called Concerning Pipeweed.
Hmm.
And according to the introduction, Mary will later in life write the seminal treatise on pipeweed called Herb Lore of the Shire.
Hmm.
Um, and he says that the Gondorians don't smoke it. It's called sweet galenus, and they think that the flowers are pretty, which is perhaps one more argument for it being tobacco, because I think tobacco flowers are prettier than hemp flowers. Um, but Mary says it probably originated in Numenor, or quote unquote Westerness. So maybe that's the American connection. Maybe Numenor is both Atlantis and the Americas. Who knows?
Hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting that it was obviously brought here purposefully because nobody south of here smokes it.
Yeah.
But anyway, they finally spend enough time smoking. Legolas is like, "Can we have the tale of what the fuck happened now?"
Hmm. And Aragorn specifically is also saying, we will sit on the edge of ruin and talk, as Gandalf says, while he is busy elsewhere. And he's just sort of chilling, taking his cloak off, blowing smoke rings. And then we get a line from Pippin. Look, said Pippin, Strider the Ranger has come back. He has never been away, said Aragorn. I am Strider and Dunedain too, and I belong both to Gondor and the North. And that's awesome considering all of these great Shining King moments. We haven't really thought about Strider Ranger, in a minute. But it's queer to contain multitudes. And I love that. And I
It
love his
is.
assertion that he doesn't have to just be limited to one aspect of himself, saying, no, this. I have a lot of different aspects to my personality. And right now, I'm exhausted and I'm vibing and I want to hear your story.
I'm vibing. I'm a little bit high. Let's go. But they fill them in on, the parts of the story that we have heard,
Hmm.
right? Um, there's one line here that I picked up on where Pippin talks about casting away his leaf, his Lorien brooch,
Hmm.
and Aragorn returns that and their swords to them. But Pippin was saying, like, I didn't want to give up the leaf, but what else could I do? And Aragorn says, you did what you had to do. One who cannot cast away a treasure at need is in fetters. Um,
I wrote down the same line. Yeah.
and I think Aragorn and Marie Kondo would get along.
Not exactly where my mind went, but yeah.
I went to Middle Earth Marie Kondo.
I was just thinking more meta that this is a microcosm of the whole conflict with the ring, of that it's a treasure and you have to get rid of it and you have to have the strength to part with something that is extremely precious. And, if you can't do that with the brooch, then how are you going to achieve that with the ring eventually when we reunite with Sam and Frodo? And there's also just a
That is a
little
much better analysis.
thank you. There is also a little literal footnote about time, which I know that you would like, and maybe you wrote this down, maybe you didn't, but it was just before this, that all months in the Shire reckoning have 30 days. So if we're thinking about their calendar and the way that they arrange times, 30-day months, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, but they're reconciling the timelines, filling in gaps. We get a little snippet that apparently Ents call the speech that we use short language, and I really like that.
I think it's also fun because all of us are short to Ents.
This is true. It's a little guy language. We're all little guys.
Little guy language for the really people who talk way too fucking fast. Um, which also, now that I think about it, is kind of interesting because like metabolism and pace of life roughly scale with body size.
Hmm. I guess that
And
makes
so
sense.
like really, really tiny little animals like, you know, mice and hummingbirds have like really, really fast like heartbeats and metabolisms. Um, and like flies, like we're almost like moving through soup.
Hmm.
When we try and hit them, they can get out of the way because they feel air currents. And um, so I kind of think it's interesting then to think about like Tolkien would not have known this, but perhaps the Ents at this larger side of uh, biology are moving at a sort of ponderous pace through life, just because that's their
Hmm.
biological want.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that makes a lot of sense. I like that.
um,
And
more
we,
biologist thoughts.
I love that. We recap what happened with the Ents and Isengard specifically. And I just sort of very briefly glossed over this. If you have more detail, then please. But basically, they show up, there's a big horn blast, and everyone in the Ent and Hobbit company thinks that this means, oh my god, they see us, they're coming out to fight us. But apparently, Saruman, who I have to keep constantly correcting myself to make sure I'm not saying Sauron when I mean Saruman. If there's a pause before I say it, it's because my little gears in my brain are turning. But he was emptying the city basically. He was sending his forces off somewhere else, which I was not 100% clear where they're going or if we're supposed to know where they're going, and I just missed it.
Yeah, that's it, we're sort of like connecting the timelines here, right?
Hmm.
This gets us now because we start with it was like they start at 9 days back, basically, when they got kidnapped. This now roughly corresponds with the time where, and it says they split into sort of like two groups. Some of them went towards like the West March and Helm's Deep, and some of them went towards the Fords of Isen.
Okay, got it.
So that's sort of where they all ended up.
Yeah. And So they're leaving, and Treebeard says that he's not interested in fighting the army. He doesn't care that the people are leaving. That's not his issue. His problem is with the city of Isengard itself, with rock and stone, the structures. And they just fucking go at it. And I love that perspective because, like we've talked about, he's concerned with the natural world and the natural order.
Mhm.
And this perversion of the natural order that is the built environment of Isengard, that's what he's primarily interested in destroying.
It's interesting because, like, then, you kind of think about what happens when humans abandon a place, right? How
Hmm.
nature slowly starts to reclaim it. And they're just
Yeah.
doing that over the course of, 24 hours rather than over the course of centuries.
Yeah.
Um, they
And
also mention during
mhm,
this, they talk about the Hjorns, which we've mentioned before, but this is the first time we define them, right?
mhm.
And they're those semi sentient trees. They're either ant like trees or tree like ents, or possibly both. And
Disrupting the Ent tree binary.
yeah, well, and some of them, if we go back to what Treebeard said, some of them have become sort of like old and cruel and have black hearts. And, that's especially what happens when they don't have an Ent to care for them.
Hmm.
That's Old Man Willow.
Hmm. We've talked about that before, but especially
Yes.
now adding in the aspect of needing the care from an Ent.
Needing a caretaker. And then also perhaps the aspect of, would the Entwives like the Shire? Are there Ents or Entwives up in the Shire? Because we talked about the trees that walk up in the Shire that Ted Sandyman saw, or his cousin, or whoever the fuck it was, um, Sam's cousin. And we've also talked about how, like, the Old Forest and Fangorn are like the last remnants of the primeval forests
Hmm.
in Middle Earth. And so it's interesting that they both have Hjorns and possibly Ents.
I love that.
Anyway,
And we also find out that the Ents are unsurprisingly extremely sturdy. You could get them studded with arrows and they do not care. But they specifically hate axes. And that was just really funny to me because it's like, yeah, that they're trees, though. Don't hit them with an axe. And, anyone who strikes an Ent with an axe, they're not going to live long enough to take a second swing. But that I just could imagine Tolkien chuckling to himself, going, "Yeah, but they're still trees, though. So don't cut them down."
there's a couple of times in this where I think Tolkien, you know, thought about the Ents and the Hjorns and then went, "Mm, details," because uh, here we get the explanation for, like, what happened in the mists the other night, right? The Hjorns, there's a great power in them, and they seem able to wrap themselves in shadow. It is difficult to see them moving, but they do. They can move very quickly if they're angry. Um, you can stand still looking at the weather, and then suddenly you find you're in the middle of a wood, right? Which is, where they all came from at Helm's Deep.
Mhm.
But I think the wrapping themselves in shadow was fully because Tolkien was like, I don't want to have to figure out how trees are going to move. They're just going to move,
Yeah, that I respect that. We got priorities. We don't have time to explain literally everything. Just they move. They're magic trees. Just
which
keep
is
going
so
with it.
funny because he explains literally everything else.
You got to pick your battles. But
Fair. And they've
so
picked a
we
battle with rock and stone.
so we get the beginning of the battle with Rock and Stone. Saruman flees back to his tower. He apparently had come out to see the army off, but then he goes, "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit," and just gets back there as quickly as possible. And then we go back to those giant holes and pillars and shit that were in the ground that we talked about before. That there's some kind of giant, terrible machine that spews liquid fire everywhere and it kills one of the Ents. And that gets
Mhm.
them really mad. You thought they were mad before. Now there is a quote, spinning whirlwind, unquote, of boulders and other giant things. It is total primeval chaos because he fucked up real bad.
He fucked up so bad that they all stop and walk away, which, quite frankly, is more terrifying. You have these creatures that have been tearing apart your entire city with ease, and nothing can stop them besides fucking napalm.
That's one of my favorite ways for a person to be scary. And I like to think that I am able to embody a small fraction of that energy because I, shockingly, am not a very angry person. I'm pretty chill most of the time. You could never guess that from listening to me talk. But yeah, I'm pretty easygoing a lot of the time. But I think that generally, I mean, you put it very well one time when I was freaking out about something. You told me that I freak out in the most organized way possible. And my response to really, really stressful situations is to just dissociate a little tiny bit, but then just stone cold logic and reasoning mode, which can, I have been told, been very scary. And I like being able to possess a little bit of that power when I need to. I'm not a shouter, I'm not a yeller. I had this weird, this is a tangent, but at the beginning of 2020, which was a really bad time for this to happen, I developed this chronic cough that wouldn't go away for months. I did not have COVID. I took multiple tests. I got prescribed an inhaler, did nothing. I tried all kinds of medications, did nothing. I just had this cough that wouldn't fucking go away. And then after that, I haven't really been able to yell or sing or raise my voice really loudly at all. I think it just kind of fucked me up forever in that way. So I don't yell, I don't get loud. But if I'm angry, then there will be some big consequences. And so I like to imagine that I can scare people at least a little bit in the same way as the Ents because it was very delightful to watch.
The quiet, when you know they were capable of storming, and then you fuck something up and they get more quiet, that's so much worse.
Mhm.
That's so much, and then they disappear, and you're like, "What the fuck is going on? Like,
Yeah.
what are they doing?" Um,
And it, you can go,
have you
Megan.
ever did have, no, you've never watched Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail, have you?
Oh, I have.
Oh, you have,
There's a
yes. Okay,
lot of
good.
movies that I haven't seen, but that one I have because my 10th grade English teacher was a really big fan of it. And so we watched it in class, but then we skipped the Tale of Sir Galahad because that was not appropriate for school. And then I looked it up on YouTube after, and I thought that it was very scandalous. I thought, wow, I'm so cool
Um,
watching the Tale of Sir Galahad.
yeah, this is the but there's the scene where they're, invading the French Taunters castle,
Mhm,
um, and there's just the scene where, like, you have the sound of all, like, the tools in the background and the hammering and the sawing and the drilling and the as they're building the Trojan bunny,
mhm.
and, um, that's what I'm almost imagining here, and it's, like, just focused on the Frenchman's face the whole time as all of the sounds are going on. It's like because this is when they're dismantling all the dams. It's like you just
Yeah.
hear the sounds of things happening in the distance, but you cannot see what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, remember the river from earlier? How that's come back to life?
Yeah, and why it had stopped? It's because they diverted it to completely flood all of the tunnels and infernal machines under Isengard.
Yeah, and it was fucking brilliant. So as it's somewhere in between all of this, Gandalf shows up, and Gandalf and Treebeard are not surprised to see one another. I don't know if you had more commentary on that.
I have a fair amount on that actually.
Okay, so let's do that and then talk about the brilliant. When I realized what the ends were doing, I have 7 lines in my notes that are just in all caps that are just OMG, wait, what? I love it. This is amazing. So we'll get to that, but let's talk about this
Mm,
part first.
yes. I'm jumping around in time. But the Ents and the Huorns work through the day while someone watches the tower to ensure Saruman doesn't leave. And Treebeard comes down to see Merry and Pippin. Then it says he began to pull down a bit more of the walls in a leisurely sort of the way, just to amuse himself. And I was like, "Oh, wait a goddamn minute." Like, because we know the Ents can destroy things easily. They're
Mhm.
manifestations of the power of nature. But, like, Treebeard just being amused by destroying parts of a fortress that has stood for thousands of years, that's what made that stand out to me and, like, what made their power really stand out to me.
Mhm. Also, just you saying thousands of years is just making little neurons connect in my brain and thinking about how some history just isn't worth preserving. All of the
No.
fucking Confederate, it's my heritage people. Yeah, your heritage fucking sucks. Get rid of it. Like, yeah, this has stood for thousands of years and it's terrible and it's time to destroy it and have fun destroying it. And that's the extent of that thought, but it just occurred to me.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I've made bad jokes that lasted longer than the Confederacy, so, like, I don't know. Um, but this is when Gandalf shows up, which explains why Merry and Pippin were not surprised about Gandalf last chapter, because now we're back in the timeline. But Gandalf is immediately a dick to Pippin.
Staying true to himself, that is one part of his personality that has remained.
Yeah, Pippin, goes like he notes that he was surprised he could barely speak. Gandalf, I said at last, but my voice was only a whisper. Did he say, "Hello, Pippin, this is a pleasant surprise"? No, indeed. He said, "Get up, you tomfool of a took. Where in the name of wonder and all this ruin is Treebeard? I want him, quick." I'm like,
So rude.
come on, Gandalf. Like, you're decent to everyone else. It kind of bothers me now at this point.
Yeah.
It was fine when it felt like a little bit like, you know, gentle ribbing, and now it's just mean.
Mhm.
But I love Gandalf and Treebeard's interaction because Treebeard comes up and goes, Gandalf, I'm glad you've come. Wood and water, stock and stone I can master, but there is a wizard to manage here. And Gandalf goes, I need your help. You have done much, but I need more. I have about 10,000 orcs to manage. Which just magic makes you dramatic, and he is a dramatic mage.
Yeah. And Merry
Um,
and Pippin had told, yeah, because they had told Treebeard during that first interaction about what happened with Gandalf. So he
yes,
knew, but
exactly.
then also Treebeard had some kind of other information where
Yeah.
he was not surprised.
That or just like he knows Gandalf well enough in the
Hmm.
same way that I think Galadriel probably knew. Treebeard also knew.
Yeah, that I have a
Um,
quote. Yet we had told the old Ent all about Moria, but then I remembered a queer look he gave us at the time. I can only suppose he had seen Gandalf or had some news of him, but would not say anything in a hurry. Don't be hasty is his motto, but nobody, not even elves, will say much about Gandalf's movements when he is not there.
but you know who is fucking hasty all the goddamn time? Gandalf is the hastiest motherfucker.
Hmm.
Um, because, you know, like it, he shows up, he says about four sentences, he you know, they're asking him questions. You're like, "Where have you been? You're back." And Gandalf is like, "Wherever I have been, I'm back. Yes, I've seen some of the others, but news must wait." And then he just goes.
Hmm.
Um, and so I love that Treebeard does not tell Gandalf once to not be hasty because he says it so much to Merry and Pippin.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
But he knows it's a lost goddamn cause with Gandalf.
Hmm.
Um, but after Gandalf leaves, the Ents go back to being hasty.
Oh, yes, they do. And if we recall all of the big holes in the ground that were shooting out fucking napalm and killing one of the Ents, they used that and all the water that they diverted to literally boil the fucking city. They flood it and they turn on the horrible infernal fire machines, and it's just the most catastrophic, dramatic, cool plan use of the environment. I loved it. I thought it was and then afterwards, then they are still using all the technology because after the big boiling stuff, the water drains back out through the holes that are conveniently there. And then there's a giant rainbow because of all this steam. 11 out of 10. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah. Ooh, I had a line. I don't know if I mentioned it, but earlier when Pippin was talking about the Entmoot, Pippin said the Entmoot was the queerest thing he'd ever seen, which I guess is confirmation that the Shire either doesn't have any gay bars or Pippin does not go to the Shire's gay bars.
Hmm. True, true, true.
Which may mean maybe he's our token straight
Hmm. Straight
ish.
for a
I don't
given
know.
value of straight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
We
see.
can reflect on that.
And at some point in the night, Merry and Pippin almost get flooded out by the flooding of Isengard, so they have to like go and climb up and find a high point. And they sat up high and watched the drowning of Isengard.
Wormtongue shows up at some point and Treebeard tortures him a little bit just for funsies.
Yeah, Gimli asks about Wormtongue, and Wormtongue arrived and in typical Wormtongue fashion, tried to wheedle his way out of dealing with consequences.
Hmm.
But I guess Gandalf had a line that was not delivered to us. He warned Treebeard, so Treebeard is like, "You can either wait for Gandalf and the King, or you can go to the tower."
And it was not clear to me if because he's separated from the tower by all of this water. It's not clear to me if Treebeard just throws him in the water or makes him swim. He is heavily coerced into going in the water and has a miserable time. And Treebeard is just loving it. He is loving watching this pathetic little man just scramble out of the banks and flee to his silly little tower.
Yeah,
It was good. I enjoyed his revenge.
it was a great time.
Yeah. So these are pretty, despite the dramatic destruction of the city, pretty chill chapters. I don't think I have anything else specific to cover, and we can just keep trucking along next time.
No, that pretty much covers it. That's when they sort of discuss that like they found the long bottom leaf, and wow, there's some concern about where and when that came from.
Hmm.
Um, but I thought it was really fun to watch the Ents get a little hasty.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see what happens after this because Isengard has been this big, looming, our most immediate boss fight to deal with. And
Yeah.
so now what comes next after this? I don't know.
Well, what comes next after this is in 2 weeks, we will hopefully finish out our coverage of the Two Towers. But until then, you can find us on our social media at FanAppPod on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok, and also on Tumblr. I keep forgetting to mention we have one of those also at
Oh, I didn't
FanAppPod.
realize we had a Tumblr.
We do. I also forgot about it until last week.
Nice.
And so you can find us there. You can send us an email at thefandomapprentice@gmail.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a 5-star review if you like what you're hearing and talk us up to your friends. Word of mouth is definitely still the best way for us to spread.
Yeah. We have listeners in Germany now. I think we have one in Brazil that's popped up a couple of times. It's really cool to see the map of where people are listening. So if you want to give us the joy of seeing new little shapes light up on a map, share us with your friends. And
Yeah.
thank y'all for listening. Thank you for hanging out. And we will see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye, y'all. The Phantom Apprentice is produced and edited by Ryn Sam. Our music was composed and performed by James, and our art is by Casey Turgeon. This podcast is created for non-commercial entertainment purposes, and the opinions expressed therein are our own and are not reflective of the opinions of any other person or organization. The content discussed is the property of the Tolkien estate and is used here under fair use.